right, we are reading part 2 of Step Right Up, how Doc and Jim Key taught the world about kindness. Their chance came in 1897 at the Tennessee Centennial Exposition, a huge fair held in Nashville. Doc Key had been asked to help plan a building where African Americans could showcase their art, culture, and inventions. Doc asked the fair directors if he could exhibit Jim. Well, at first, the directors laughed. A horse that could read, spell, and write, and do sums? Ridiculous. But as one of the organizers of the fair, Doc insisted that Jim have a stage of his own. Soon visitors were strolling past the giant seesaw and past Edison's new moving picture machine to see Jim. Throughout the fairgrounds, people chattered about the remarkable, educated horse. Oh my goodness. During one special show, Doc greeted the packed crowd, then turned to Jim. "Jim, can you show me where President McKinley sits today?" Doc asked. Jim strutted to center stage, faced the President of the United States, and bowed. Then Jim walked over to the chalk rack, or the card rack, scanned the name cards, and picked out the one marked McKinley. A gasp echoed through the room. Well, audience members began shouting out requests for Jim. "Spell this word! Divide these numbers! Get that card! File that letter! Ring up this sale!" Jim did it all without a mistake. He even wrote his name on the blackboard. Jimkey, Jim Key. People couldn't believe their eyes. How could a horse learn to do such things? The whip makes horses stubborn, and they obey through fear, Doc explained. Kindness, kindness, and more kindness. That's the way. Well, after the Tennessee Centennial Exposition, Doc and Jim went on the road again. This time, they had a big-time promoter, Albert Rogers, to arrange performances for them. News of Jim's remarkable skills spread across the country. Admiring reporters began calling the horse Beautiful Jim Key. The name stuck. Doc and Beautiful Jim Key performed around the country, but the farther south they traveled, the more racial discrimination Doc faced. Often he wasn't allowed to eat in the same restaurants, sleep in the same hotels, or ride in the same railroad cars as white people. Sometimes Doc and Jim weren't allowed to perform because people didn't believe Doc's claims of his horse's skill. When Doc offered to perform for schools in Cincinnati, Ohio, a school board member replied, "We can't close our schools for horse shows." And people who didn't know about Doc's gentle training methods worried that Jim might be an abuser of horses, the horse performing out of fear. After a while, Doc and Jim caught the attention of humane societies, groups of people who were committed to ending cruelty toward animals. Like Doc, members of the humane societies believed the animals were intelligent, capable of emotions, and willing to learn if treated well. They deserved protection. Beautiful Jim Key was the perfect animal to represent their cause. A portion of the ticket sales for Jim's performances were donated to the Humane Society. The money was used to buy horse ambulances, rescue cranes, fund educational programs, and buy books about animals for libraries. With their growing fame, Doc and Jim were helping to promote the cause of kindness towards animals. Albert Rogers worked hard to get Doc and Jim onto prestigious stages. In New York, they performed in their own Broadway play, The Scholar and a Model Office Boy. Well, Jim played the parts of a student and a clerk. He answered the phones, rang school bells, identified colors, made change from a cash register, filed letters, and more. The man jumped to his feet. "You're wrong, Jim," he shouted. "The answer is 7. Oh, I skipped this part up here. We got to go back. At a performance in St. Louis, Jim showed off his math skills. A man called out, "Jim, if you take 7, multiply it by 3, add 9, divide by 3, and subtract 7, what should the answer be?" Well, Jim paused for a moment, then picked up the card marked with a 3. The man jumped to his feet. "You're wrong, Jim," he shouted. "The answer is 7. Jim shook his head. "No, no, no." The audience hurried to do the math. It turned out that Jim was correct. The answer was 3. People asked Doc if any horse could learn the skills that Jim had mastered. He said yes, providing he has not been abused. Spelling contest. By 1898, school districts around the country had decided that Doc Key and beautiful Jim Key were perfect examples of education and kindness. They canceled school day so students could see Jim perform. Children lined up to compete in spelling bees against the most highly educated horse in the world. In St. Louis, Missouri, Jim won by spelling the word revelation. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, he won with the name Isaiah. In Baltimore, Maryland, he won by spelling the word physics. Other cities came up with different words to test Jim. Most times, Jim won. Well, around the United States, about 2 million children stepped right up to sign the official Jim Key Pledge. I promise always to be kind to animals. Well, Doc Key and beautiful Jim Key were now famous. Record-breaking crowds packed coliseums, theaters, and music halls across the nation to see them. In every city and town, thousands of people bought tickets to attend Doc and Jim's performances. Sometimes police officers had to step in to control the mobs of enthusiastic fans who gathered. Doc and Jim were invited to perform on stages where only white entertainers had been welcomed before. Doc would not accept the segregated seating that forced African Americans into the worst seats. He insisted on special performances with equal seating for all. The property owners agreed. They couldn't argue with the most popular attraction in the country. In spite of Jim's many skills, skeptics tried to prove that Doc and Jim's act was all a hoax. They scrambled the letters, mixed up the numbers, scattered the colors and flags. Nothing seemed to fool Jim. In 1901, an investigation was conducted by professors from Harvard University. They studied Doc and Jim's performances, looking for signs of trickery. They asked Doc many questions. Some say it's hypnotism and that kind of thing. But I don't know anything about that, Doc said. But I do know Jim knows and does what I ask him to do. Well, the next day, the Boston Daily Globe newspaper printed an article with the results of the Harvard study. The professors came to the conclusion that there were no tricks or hoax. It is simply education, they said. Well, by 1906, 73-year-old Doc and 17-year-old Jim were worn out. For 9 years, they had traveled the country. Now it was time to go home to the rolling hills of Shelbyville, where they could continue to learn and play together. They had proven to millions of people that Doc Key had always believed, with kindness, anything is possible. It is hoped that those who have met Jim Key will have carried away with them a kinder regard towards animals, and will go forth resolved to whatever may be in their power for the care of our friends. From a tribute to Jim Key, the Atlanta Constitution, December 23rd, 1898. And that is a newspaper. The end.